Alright, hello people! Welcome back to the podcast by Catz and Cowbox. I am Cowbox, aka
Hello.
David, and
Yeah, I'm Katz, also known as Alex. Hello.
yes, and thank you for tuning in once again to us rambling on about why we love video games so much. So, on to today's topic will actually be about heroes, the protagonist of the story, not necessarily always the hero of the story.
No, because that's an interesting thing, how you can write the protagonist not actually being the hero, either
Yes.
through playing as an anti-hero or just going straight at the villain.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting the way things you can do with the protagonist. But let's just, because we've talked about this a lot, and we want to try to keep this show focused on RPGs in general, just because we both adore RPGs, and there's a lot you can gain from RPGs. So, what do you think are some like the most common tropes of RPG heroes?
I mean, when I think RPG hero, I mostly think about this like extreme like justice-based person.
Yeah, very
because that's a very common trope.
yeah, very
or
very straightforward, very heroic.
yeah, the straightforward, simplistic, heroic, and then
heroic.
We also have this. If we go slightly more toward like the anime territory, we also have like this kind of clueless hero. Maybe I should say.
Yes. The confused one. And that is actually a really good storytelling technique, although it is really getting annoying, as it is because
it can get a bit.
It gets a bit too much. But something good that can come out of having a clueless hero is it gives the audience a surrogate character so that they know what's going on. Because a world lives.
Gives a reason to explain the world more in depth.
Yeah. A way you can make a compelling world is to make it seem like it lives even when you're not watching it, and even though the characters are not living in it. And the best way you can explain that to the character, or to the audience, is to have a character be the clueless character. Having said that, however, there are other ways you can do that in a much better way, like having it in the background, having it in small dialogues with the background characters, without directly telling the audience, hey, this is what's happening over at this place.
Then again, I still kind of prefer the actual character who is actually clueless over the one that, I have amnesia and I totally don't know what's going on thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that has been done a little bit too often.
Yeah.
So having a character that actually does belong in the world, but just is in general clueless about what's going on, is a nice alternation to that, I guess.
Yeah. And let's just take the second to talk about tropes. I know we talked about we kept throwing the word trope in last time. So let's take a second to define a trope. And my definition of a trope has always been something that or an element or a character, an element of a story that appears commonly through stories of similar nature.
Yeah, it's very similar to another term you might use is the archetype or
the
archetype, depending on how you want to say it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not trying to say that tropes are necessarily a bad thing. Tropes are, the reason that they're used so much is because they do interest the audience.
Yeah, they're interesting and they're very simple to understand often.
Yes. But if a story begins to use too many tropes, then the audience begins to be able to predict the story, and at that point, it just makes the story not quite as enjoyable if your audience knows exactly what's going to happen just because of tropes as opposed to subtle foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also the thing, a good game, I'd say, or a good movie, it uses tropes, but the characters are more than just the tropes.
Exactly. Trope could be used to set the scene so that the audience has expectations, and then subverting the tropes can make it a more compelling story.
Yeah, because that's often what, gives the characters more depth and make them more interesting, simply by giving them this certain archetype or trope, and then adding certain twists or sometimes breaking away from it.
Yeah, exactly. It makes the character much more interesting to the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, but going back to our main topic of the main character, some of the tropes that I've noticed of the main characters they're always heroic. though many of them are quite clueless. They're always like, "Oh, we're super powerful, but we're kind of a dope and everyman, except the fact that we have unlimited power."
Yeah, because that's also like the way they try to push, like, oh, I'm actually just kind of normal every day. It's also like, to make it easier to identify with them, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but another trope that personally bothers me in main characters is the prophecy trope. The trope, oh, you are the chosen one. You are destined to. You are the only one able to fix the world. And like again, that trope isn't necessarily bad per se. The problem is that when you use that trope, it trivializes your side characters, your supporting cast. It makes them feel
it's also used very frequently. So
yeah, exactly. It's one of the most common tropes that I've noticed in anime and RPG games is the chosen boy that comes from a small village is the only one that can save the world. And that specifically that bothers me when they're the only one that can save the world, because then it makes it feel as if their actions are predetermined. It makes you feel as if they can't lose because they're the chosen one. And I believe that's a problem in the story. But yes.
Yeah, so then again we also have partly the heroes who break from these tropes, but more interesting maybe are when you look at another spectrum where you look at something that maybe is more of an anti-hero, or you should maybe even say the term anti-villain.
Yes, anti-hero / anti-villain. Basically, okay, again, these have plenty of tropes, but in recent media I noticed a rise in the anti-hero. Anti-heroes have become much more popular than in the older days of video games. In the original days of video games, it really was just, oh, you're the hero of the world. But now you see a lot of, oh, you're just doing this because you have to, but they're always the gruff, mean type that doesn't take shit from anybody.
Yeah, I think that can be like an interesting way to go forward, because, I mean, most often when you look at when anti-heroes step into a medium, is also like when the medium is changing very much. And I think, like, for the last 5 to 10 years, the video game industry has been changing really fast.
Right.
And I think that could probably be one of the reasons why you've started to see more and more of the anti-heroes as well.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, you really are right. If you look at the film industry, there was a huge period of the anti-hero time, which is what I'd call like the wild
comic books.
I'm not sure exactly the period, but it was a period where it was essentially a bunch of in the Wild West period is what I would call it in film, where there's tons of Wild West films coming out. A lot of those heroes in the Wild West films were very much anti-heroes.
Yeah.
And again, same looking at comic books. Around the 90s was the rise of heroes like Deadpool or Deathstroke. Or which Deathstroke is actually just a villain, but so a lot of these more evil, I would say, closer to evil than good types started rising in the medium. And I think that period is currently happening in video games right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would really say evil, but like it's more like they work closer to within the moral gray area. Yeah,
the moral gray,
and that's kind of what makes them interesting, because they're not always in the right. They can be in the wrong, or when they are in the right, they might still be doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and then you could really make some really interesting stories with that, and make some interesting conundrums for the characters. And there's also a huge rise in games I've noticed that have a morality system. If you notice, where the character, where you get to choose whether the character is bad or good. I notice a problem with many of those games, though. I'm not sure if you've noticed it, but a lot of them come down to like one decision makes it you either good or bad, and I think that's just
pretty lame.
That just kind of trivializes the whole moral system.
Yeah. If you have like choices throughout the entire game
that build up to
one final point, and all of these choices you made previously doesn't even matter. That's pretty lame. It's anticlimactic to say the least.
I just want to point out Mass Effect 3. Still salty about that. Not sure if you've ever played the Mass Effect games, but
I own it, but I haven't even opened the plastic. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, I enjoyed the Mass Effect games, but I felt like Mass Effect 3 was really dropped the ball with the ending there.
Yeah, I've heard quite a lot of mixed reception on that one.
I thought again that's a game where you can see both like, oh, they did a really good moral system throughout like the first 2 games, and even throughout the 3rd game. It's just the ending is ruined because it comes down to one decision, not affected by any of your other decisions from the past. And that becomes frustrating as a gamer especially if you're led to believe that, oh, all my decisions matter, when in the end only one decision matters.
Yeah, but then again, maybe looking more at this anti-hero concept, maybe we should do it like extra explanation to make sure everybody gets kind of like the idea behind an anti-hero.
Right, yeah. Well, in my mind, an anti-hero is really just someone who does things for their own selfish reasons that end up being good in the end. If that makes sense. And also,
most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time that's generally what happens. Like if you look at Frank Castle, the Punisher from comic books, much of his reason of what he does is because he wants revenge, and that makes him more of an anti-hero than a hero. Although another way you can be an anti-hero, as you can see, is basically treading that moral gray line. Because what like all medium has taught me, anyways, is that killing is bad. Killing makes you evil.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and saving people is good, right? And the morally gray would be like, oh, you killed someone to save someone else, and that would be what a lot of people see anti-heroes as today.
Yeah, so one definition I encountered is about that an anti-hero is someone that you root for them despite knowing that you should not root for them.
Really? Huh. That's an interesting definition. Why can you explain that a bit more?
No, I mean, this was just something I came across looking around stuff. And, like, I'm not sure how, like, correct, so to speak, that is. But, I mean, it's an interesting view on it, I think.
Yeah, it's a very interesting view.
It's a bit limiting, but...
I think it's a bit limiting and a bit too broad, is what I would say, because there are many times where I root for the villain. Even though I know I shouldn't root for the villain. Yeah. And maybe that's just because I'm an evil person inside deep down.
but like, then again, like, how deep, like, do you root for them, like, all the time? Or, like, you just root for them and then, like, when you actually come to the end, it's like, nah, it's better if you don't.
I don't know, like for a good example in my mind, have you ever played the Borderlands series?
No, but you're talking about Beautiful Jack or whatever.
Yeah, Jack. It's Handsome Jack. Yeah, Handsome Jack he is quite honestly one of my favorite villains because of how charming he is. He's a villain through and through. He's openly a villain. It does get into a moral area when you see why he's doing his villainous acts.
It's like the pre-sequel, right?
The pre-sequel, and even in the the pre-sequel, he's one of the main characters. But also, even in the Borderlands 2, where he first appeared, you could see the reasoning why he wanted to do what he did. Of course, he took it way too far. But personally, when I was playing through the game, just because of how charming he was, I was rooting for him. I knew I shouldn't root for him. He was an evil person, but I was rooting for him because of how charming he is. And that doesn't make, in my mind, that doesn't make him an anti-hero. So that's where I would disagree with the definition that you saw.
Yeah, and of course, there are certain games where you kind of play as the villain. Because you're like emotionally invested in like beating the game. Yeah. You kind of root for the villain, but they're not an anti-hero. Like they're still clearly a villain.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So anti-hero is very broad, in my opinion, character description. Very hard to pinpoint what it is to be an anti-hero.
Yeah. I mean, because the best explanation I could have for it was like, you would be moving around in more of the moral gray areas. You would be doing actions that, if you look closely at them, you would probably think, what I did here is probably wrong. But like, the anti-hero is more than just a character who's being a prick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and anti-heroes can be very interesting, and that's a huge reason why a lot of medium does turn to it when they're going through a change, because anti-heroes are very relatable to people, because most people are generally not perfect symbols of hope and justice.
No, of course not.
And so they can relate to selfish desires, which is another huge aspect I see of anti-heroes, is they are generally a bit selfish in their acts.
Yeah.
Their acts are a bit more selfish.
They're not doing things for the good of the world, or for the good of the people, but because they self-want them. So I mean, a good idea of an anti-hero would maybe be Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. It's he's greedy, he only really cares about himself, and then he kind of is seen as a hero, but not really. Yeah,
the only reason he's his acts are mostly entirely selfish. I believe in the first movie, it's been a while since I've seen it, but his goal is to try to get in the end he ends up saving everybody from the pirates that end up becoming ghosts, right? It's been a long time, but and then he saves them because he wants to get his ship back.
Yeah, of course. The reason he was after these pirates was because he wanted their ship.
Yeah, exactly. So it was his selfish desires and reason led him to do the right thing, but it was because of his selfish action, and that would be a good way I could see of an anti-hero. See what an anti-hero is. Yeah. Yeah. But
then the idea between what actually is an anti-hero, I feel it's pretty hard to just describe it perfectly.
Yeah, it's anti-heroes are very, very broad in general, but let's just go back to other protagonists. One thing I noticed is that RPG protagonists, Japanese RPG protagonists in general, are generally not anti-heroes.
No, we don't see that very often from Japanese games. That's more the Western style.
It's a very Western style of just making a character to have an anti-hero. Yeah. Whereas in Japan, they're more about having I hesitate to say straight because that makes them sound boring, but more good, morally good characters.
I mean, a bit simpler. Then, of course, they can still raise a lot of moral, what is wrong, what is right points. But the core of the character, what you get presented with from the beginning, is usually much more simple.
Yeah, exactly. And although again, you could make some really interesting characters with these more morally good characters. I've noticed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there are plenty of examples.
It really depends. Yeah, sorry. It really depends on how you do the characters, because when you want to create a good character, most of the time you're trying to create something a character that can seem human, that it seems like they're real.
Yeah, exactly. That's a huge thing when just creating protagonists. It's a protagonist that doesn't seem human is a bit too unrelatable to the audience, and just brings you out of the story. Whereas a character who is human becomes more memorable in your mind. You remember characters that are more human than characters that just exist. Which
then, of course, you can always go because then you have to kind of balance it, because a character that never really makes any mistakes and doesn't really have any flaws, that's not human at all. A character that does way too many mistakes and has tons of flaws and does not improve upon them, that doesn't seem human either. Yeah. So you have to find the middle ground.
Yeah, because the characters that you were just speaking about, the character that just has too many faults and doesn't learn from them, becomes quite a grating character to play as, especially as a protagonist, because you feel I should be controlling them.
Exactly.
Especially in video games where you are generally in control. If you're in control and then you make a mistake in the game, then you're oh, I won't do that anymore. A good example of that is the Dark Souls series. I'm not the biggest fan of that series. Personally, I don't think it's bad by any means, but that's a good example of trial and error. You do something bad and you avoid doing it again. And when a character doesn't do that, it makes them just feel dumb, and it just really makes you angry. It grates me anyways. It really grates me.
Yeah, no, it does. It annoys me a lot as well. But commonly, you don't see that. It's much more common to see a perfect character than an extremely flawed character. Then, of course, there are stuff like Cornface from Fire Emblem Fates, which is just whatever. Yeah. And I had another example, but
Let's go to talk about the perfect character. I believe that the actual term for a perfect character would be a Mary Sue, right? I believe Mary Sue slash Gary Sue. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Mary Sue is basically a character, the protagonist who can do no wrong. A perfect protagonist that seems to get powers out of nowhere and just seems to breeze through the story without really a hitch.
Then again, it's not so much. I wouldn't say that is so much about the characters not doing mistakes. It's more about when the character actually does a mistake, it holds no impact because everything magically goes well for them anyways. And that is something you really should avoid. Yeah, and
another thing you should avoid if you're making a protagonist is the magical power-up. The power-up that comes out of nowhere. Where, like, if you're fighting the final boss, and one of my favorite game series is kind of guilty of this. I'm talking about Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda, the light arrow. The BS, I think it's kind of BS. I love Zelda to death. I absolutely adore all Zelda games, but I'll admit that that's a good example of pulling a random power seemingly out of nowhere. Some Zelda games do a better job about avoiding that, but like if you look at Ocarina of Time, it kind of feels like Zelda is like, oh, here, I have light arrow powers now, and I'm giving it to you just now because you're starting to lose, right?
Yeah. But it's through the power of magic and friendship.
Okay, can we talk
for
about...
certain games, that can work. Yeah. Most of the time, it doesn't.
Can we just talk about that for a second? The power of friendship.
Oh, yeah.
That's BS. That is BS.
I mean, sometimes it's used in a good way.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's not. And even when it's used in a good way, it feels so extremely cheesy that I'm not sure if I should like it or not.
Yeah. And, like, I generally don't have a problem with cheese. I love old pre-90s comic books that are, like, super cheesy. A problem, though, exists when it's, like, at the very end, all your friends are like, oh, we believe in you, and then you suddenly do it. It's just... It becomes a... It wouldn't be a problem if it didn't appear in so many games and movies and anime, I feel like.
I mean, so I kind of want to say that I don't really like it. I'm a huge fan of Tales of games, and they are... Yeah. They are pretty much like, all of them kind of tie in with like magical friendship and stuff like that in one way or another, because they're... I mean, they can have really dark stories and like characters with really depressing past, but it kind of has this like magical...
Yeah, the overarching theme of friendship.
Yeah, friendship thing.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite game in that series is actually Grey's F, and that entire game is based around a friendship pact, so whatever.
Like, again, we're saying this not because these tropes are bad per se, we're talking about this because of how often these tropes appear.
And when they're used so often, of course, some of the times they're used poorly.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes
and that leaves a sour taste in your mouth.
Very well.
Yeah, and then it leaves a sour taste in your mouth. But yeah. So protagonists that come out with like great powers out of nowhere, I really get frustrated in that. Like, I know a lot of people tend to point to I personally enjoy Dragon Ball a lot. Dragon Ball is guilty of the random power up, but a lot of people point to the first Super Saiyan, and I would disagree about that. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the first Super Saiyan comes from rage when one of Goku's friends end up getting killed, and that feels like a natural power up because the entire biology
it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, based on what they gave us, the entire biology of Goku's character and his race, essentially, rage makes them stronger. That makes
absolutely no sense. I've read all of the Dragon Ball manga. That and like all of the constant revival of characters as well.
Yeah, the constant revival of characters, that's a bit too much, but yeah. But I do feel like the first Super Saiyan transformation is a good example of a natural transformation. That
felt kind of natural, and then somewhere towards the later
parts, towards the later, I would say Super Saiyan 2 felt a bit natural. Super Saiyan 3 was when it started feeling like, okay, you just wanted another power-up, didn't you? But I digress.
And that's also an interest. Looking at Dragon Ball, that's an interesting way of like the power curve. How like constantly more and more. And, this one this enemy is powerful enough to destroy an entire country. This one is powerful enough to destroy an entire world. This to destroy an entire universe, and like it just keeps on going, and going. Yeah, and somewhere along the end, you stop taking this seriously.
Exactly. It feels less threatening. You don't feel you don't feel the threat, therefore you don't feel tension. If you don't feel tension, it just makes the story feel a bit more hollow.
Yeah, I mean, I still like Dragon Ball, but
actually, I'd like to take this tangent to say, guys, as it turns out, you can criticize things you like.
Yeah, of course.
As it turns out, things you like are not always perfect. And that's completely fine. Unless it's Xenoblade. Xenoblade's perfect. Fight me about that right now. Let's go. I could come up with things wrong with the original Xenoblade too. My favorite game. So, it's a thing that I noticed that a lot of people seem to get a bit too defensive whenever someone criticizes something they like. It's a good idea to step back and learn to take from criticism. All right, with that PSA over, however, going back to the main character. Another interesting thing that I notice RPGs do, however, is the silent protagonist. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Yeah, that's very common, especially in some of the older games.
Yeah, especially with
of course,
older games.
It's not only RPGs, but if you look at something like Half-Life, for example.
Yeah. It's become a very commonplace for a lot of RPGs, and it can end up hurting the story, or it can help the story.
It depends, because, for example, if you look at I think it kind of depends on how you want to tell the story. Because if you want to tell a story focused around the character, having a silent protagonist is probably going to hurt your game.
Yeah. But if you go for something that not focused on the story, not really story focused, more gameplay focused, something like the Diablo series.
Yeah, or, for example, if you go for a game that focuses more on the story of the world.
Yes.
Then having a silent protagonist doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, and a problem I notice is that a lot of people are like, or a lot of developers are like, it's a silent protagonist, we don't need to give him any character. And I would disagree with that on the main point that Chrono Trigger exists. Chrono Trigger, the main character of Chrono Trigger, he is a silent protagonist, but he has so much character. He has so much character in life in the game, and
that's a really good game that I've watched a bit of, and I really need to try playing it myself.
You haven't played? Oh, okay. Good thing I was about to go into spoilers, but let's not.
I've watched a speed run of it, and I've watched a bit of gameplay. So, you're fine if you want to go in and talk about a specific thing. But spoilers for Chrono Trigger.
Oh yeah. So I'm just going to talk about a decent. Big spoilers towards the end of Chrono Trigger. Chrono dies. He straight up just dies, and you feel sad because you saw how he developed with the other characters, and what he meant to the other characters, and what he meant to you, and he just dies. And there's a way you can get him back, but it's not like a forced story moment. If you don't go through the side quest, you're not going to get him back, and you could just fight the final boss without using him. And I find that interesting because you feel bad when Chrono dies, even though he's just a silent protagonist, you know?
Yeah, and that's because, he's important, not just for the story, but to you as well. And
even as a silent protagonist, you see his character, you see how much of a selfless hero he is, and even then, it makes him an interesting character. And a lot of other games who do use silent protagonists are just like, oh, he's silent, let's not do anything with him at all. And that's
even if the character himself is silent, you can still give them a lot of room to quote unquote talk in seeing other characters react to your characters. You can have party members react to something you said, even if your character actually didn't put any text on the screen.
Yeah, and now that we're on the topic of characterizing characters through not dialogue, there's a lot of ways you can characterize characters without dialogue.
Definitely.
So especially through animation. I think animation.
Yeah, exactly. Just the visuals can tell you a lot about the character.
And I think a really good recent example of this is Overwatch. I'm not sure if you play Overwatch much.
I haven't played it, but like I know enough of it to like participate in.
I mean, it's a first-person shooter. It's a first-person team-based shooter, right? And in the game, you're not getting much story besides a few quips between characters. But if you look at the character animation, it becomes clear that the creators worked really hard. Blizzard and their team worked really hard on making sure that each character has their own unique feel, and their own character that oozes through the gameplay as well, which I think is very important to make a good character, especially if you're the one playing.
Yeah, and like just looking at how they move, like what sounds they make, you can really like get a sense of their personality.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if you go to the Overwatch website, Blizzard has like a lot of lores and videos and stuff about them as well. So like even if there is no story within the game, there is definitely a lot of story you can see looking at the characters, looking at the maps you play in, and then whatever you haven't figured out by that, you can fill in by going to the website and just reading up and stuff.
But like a really interesting thing that Overwatch does is one of its characters, one of my favorite, Junkrat. He's a very he's the explosion master of Overwatch, right? He just blows shit up, right? That's his point, and you could tell that through the character. His character is very I would say, distracted by a lot of things. He's very twitchy and very a bit insane, and you could tell that through the character's idle animation. If you're just sitting there with him, he's always just like twitching slightly, moving his gun slightly. Always, his hand is always just shaking, and just little things like that tell so much about a character. That, especially if you're playing as him, it gets you to feel what the character is. And like an exact opposite example that they did in Overwatch is Soldier 76, and he's a soldier, right? So he's very, very straight and narrow. He's very, very I guess.
Static.
Static, yes, exactly. That's a good way to say it. And you can tell that through the animation. When his idle animation, he doesn't really move at all. He stays in ready to shoot. He's always ready and prepared by all his animations, and I think that's
like saving energy, not moving more than necessary.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really great way of characterizing characters. And I do wish that more games used things that are not just dialogue to tell what a character is.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, don't tell, show, and don't show, act.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how the game works.
Exactly. Like, one of my biggest gripes about a lot of RPG heroes is, like, they will straight up say, I will save the world. A lot. And that's what they do.
As if it wasn't clear enough by your gameplay or actions.
Yeah, but then there's other games. Xenoblade. Now, let's go back to Xenoblade, because we both love it. You see Shulk, he doesn't like stop and talk a lot. A lot of times he just straight up acts and just charges at the enemy. You can tell that he is kind of an impatient child sometimes when it comes to his lust for vengeance.
Yeah, from time to time. And that's also like, looking back at that and looking back at one certain scene, right after the mecha attack on Colin 9. It's very interesting just to see that.
Yeah, and
so like, huge spoiler thing here, if you haven't beaten the entire game, like, cut out for like, until this is done. Because after the attack, when Ryan talks to Shulk, after, I think it's as they're about to leave, Shulk says, in my head there's two versions of me. One tells me to heed Dunban's advice and value the life that Fiora saved.
Yeah.
And the other one say, I'll kill them all.
Yeah. Yeah,
and looking back at what we learn at the end of the game, how Sansa actually resides within Shulk all this time, that second voice is probably not Shulk, but it's Sansa.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is, although he said it in the end, you could see his actions. You could see him acting out his want for vengeance against the Mechon before he even says that during the attack. After he sees Fiora, he immediately just like charges at Metalface after he screams in pain. And again, that's actions instead of words. You have the words explain what's happening just directly, but if you have it before the character does it, it just feels a bit empty. It feels like, oh, this is. Why are you telling us this? Why don't you just show us this?
I am going to do a sneak attack.
I am going to sneak.
It doesn't have the same impact as actually getting ambushed.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the end, a lot of main characters. The main characters are really important, I think, to making or breaking a game. How good a main character is. Because no matter how good the game is, I feel like if the main character doesn't resonate with me, I feel like I just don't have the drive to finish it.
No. Yeah, I can agree a lot with that. Or not quite so recently, but I played Star Ocean 5.
Right.
And, I mean, somehow I managed to finish that game. I think the game is just a bad game. There's no other way to say it. But if at least the characters, more important than the main character, had been slightly more likable, I think I could have enjoyed playing it despite it being an absolutely horrible piece of shit game. Yeah.
And let's talk about just likable characters, because a lot of games I notice have very unlikable characters. Either main character or side character becomes unlikable at the grading. But I noticed that, personally for me, if a villain or a side character is likable enough, I'll definitely stick with the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And a good example of this in movies, I'm not thinking of a good game example, but in movies, I've noticed that a lot of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I've become quite accustomed to just not liking some of the characters at all. They are well-made movies, but sometimes the characters just feel bland.
Yeah, then again, it kind of varies from movie to movie, game to game, but when you have a really big cast, it's often very likely, if you have a cast of 7 to 10 characters, there's probably going to be one that you either find slightly annoying or just don't really like or don't really agree with.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it's nothing weird.
Yeah, it's inevitable. But
when there is too many characters that you find annoying, then it actually becomes hard to complete to complete the game.
Yeah, exactly. And then I realize we haven't really touched much on character development at all.
No.
And I believe character development is one of the most important parts of making or breaking a good character arc, having a good character arc.
Yeah.
If a character does not change over a game, my thought is kind of, what's the point? What's the point of going through the story with this character if that character doesn't change throughout the game? If that makes sense.
No, of course. Because, part of what you want to see is, of course, the major story to unfold.
Yeah.
But you also want to see, the character or characters improve, because, that is also something you can relate to yourself.
Yeah. Not only relating, though, but, seeing how the characters change because of the event. Because I believe that a lot of writers could come up with cool events and moments.
Yeah, of course.
But what separates just writers from a fantastic writer is how they have the characters change throughout the moments. How they have the moments affect the characters.
Are affected by the events and then get changed correctly. So, and one example I would take up once again, this would be touching spoiler territory, is how Tales of the Abyss handles its one main protagonist.
Right. I've not played that game, so I'm free. Feel free to spoil it for me. But how does it?
When you begin that game, the protagonist you're playing to is he's an entitled, rich asshole that looks down on people.
Right.
And then pretty much you could quite say that his world fell apart.
Right.
Quite literally.
Oh, okay.
So, and after that event, you have one or two scenes where he looked back at his actions and realizes how wrong he has been all this time.
Right.
And after that, he becomes one of the nicest people, one of the nicest protagonists ever, without being this typical anime good guy trope.
Right. Okay. So I'm assuming. So initially in the game, he doesn't really start out as a likable character. He's kind of a douche.
For the first 10 or so hours, you're supposed to hate him. Like,
really? Okay.
They really wrote him in a way that you're supposed to dislike him.
Right.
Just so you can have this big, plot point where everything kind of turns around.
And I think that's a mark of a good writer. Someone who can make you dislike a character and immediately change to liking it, and vice versa. Having you like a character and immediately change to disliking them, and then changing to liking them again. I would like to point out, not Dunvan, what's his name? Dixon in Xenoblade.
Dixon,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, he was an emotional roller coaster for me, but yeah, that's a mark of a good writer.
Once again, Xenoblade spoilers.
yeah. Xenoblade spoilers. Dixon ends up killing Shulk, kind of.
Yeah.
And Dixon is an emotional roller coaster for me. There are moments where I absolutely despise him, and then by the time he dies, I just cry. I cry every time.
Yeah, actually, because in the beginning, he's you really from just the first scenes in the first few hours of the game, you really see him as a father figure to Shulk.
Yeah.
And then as you start progressing slightly more through the game, you encounter him 2 or 3 more times, and he always helps you out in one way or another.
Yeah.
And then he shoots you in the back, and you dick.
Yeah, I know exactly.
That's all I could think.
Yeah, and that's a mark. That's a mark of not only good writers, but also just good characters in general.
Yeah.
And this ties in really well with main characters too. Another moment from Xenoblade, in which you can see Shulk's change, you can feel Shulk's change, is the moment when Gunman is about to kill Metalface, and Shulk straight up stops him. Shulk's entire goal throughout the game was probably to kill Metalface. That's the reason why he left. And just seeing him change, and seeing after he saw the world and saw everything for how it is, and start understanding what is going on.
Yeah, and also understanding the mechans are more especially the face mechans are more than just machines.
Yeah, they're not just machines. Then you see him start to change, and that change is you feel it as a character too. At that moment, I really wanted. I wanted Metalface to die, but then Shulk stopped, and I thought, wait, do I want him to die?
Because if I kill him, am I better than him?
Yeah, exactly.
From a moral standpoint, can I really say the right thing to do?
Yeah. So those are just some great examples of good main characters. Although, yeah. So I think we've covered mostly what we want to talk about.
Yeah, a lot about it. But so one of the key things to having a good main character is to give them development, to have them change throughout the story.
Yeah.
But I'd say before you can do that, you need to give the main character a reason. Why do they
motivation?
Do this?
Yes, exactly.
Motivation.
Exactly. One terrible way to write characters is to have them just exist as the story is going on.
Yeah, just like a plot point. I'm doing this just because.
Yeah, I'm doing this because, I don't know, the story told me to. Because reasons.
I mean, because then you're back kind of to they show someone, I'm a plot point, I'm supposed to do this, something, pick up the Sword of Light and defeat the evil dragon. I'm not sure why, but I'm just doing it.
Yeah, it really also just removes, makes the immersion, it removes the immersion from the game.
Oh yeah.
If your character isn't really having a reason to do it, why do you have a reason to do it?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do I want to save the world? Why do I want to save the world if my character doesn't even really seem to want to save the world, if he just exists and does things without reasoning? Besides just, I have to save the world because I'm the good guy.
Yeah. So to make an interesting and well-written character, we need a motivation for them, why they're going to go on this journey, do this thing.
Yeah.
You need to, during this journey, the event, the experience should change them. They should be affected by this and grow as a character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I also say one more thing that most of the time makes for interesting characters are conflict, whether it's the major external conflict that affects them, or if it's an internal conflict.
Right, and I think having conflict in the character, again, this makes them feel more human. It makes them feel less like a cardboard cutout that you're just walking around.
Yeah.
Again, going back to Xenoblade, Shulk, you can see the internal struggle of wanting to kill mechons, but realizing that, hey, there's humans inside of them. Or Homs, I mean. What should I do? And a lot of other characters do this really well, in my opinion. Well, I would like to talk about my personal favorite Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah?
Final Fantasy IX.
Okay, sure.
Although not a main character, I would argue that he's kind of a main character. Vivi from Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah.
He has a lot of internal struggles about like who he is, because he was kind of manufactured by. He was just like he's not really a real person, you know. Like he's manufactured, and just seeing that internal struggle made him one of my favorite characters from Final Fantasy in general. And that's how you make. This is, I guess, this isn't how you make good protagonist. This is how you make a memorable protagonist. A protagonist that sticks with you throughout, even after you have finished playing the game.
Yes, of course, because conflict is something that like we find it very interesting, so it makes it easier to get invested in a character. And it also shows a different side to them, meaning that they are seem more human.
Yeah, it makes them seem less one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Less like, I am the comedic character, I am the jokester, I am the hero that saves everything in the end, and that's all I do. Nothing else. So yeah.
Yeah. And one interesting way to like add a conflict is to like, especially for internal conflict, it's like the idea of conflicting character traits. For like one very commonly used, if for example like they have a very caring personality and kind and that, but like they have some sort of power that can hurt other people, which is for very simple but uncommonly used internal conflict.
I think that's a really good example of how to make a good character that is still super powerful. If you want to have, I believe, if you want to have a character be super powerful, and have no one else compete to them, make it so that their power is it comes at a cost.
Yeah,
you cannot
of course.
Use the power unless you or especially if they don't know that the power comes at a cost. I think that makes it really interesting. That makes
for some interesting interaction. Also, going back to the point about like Mary Sue, Gary Stu, about like just making everything go their way, making them incredibly powered without having some sort of conflict or some sort of like prize reaction to what they do.
Yeah.
Doesn't make for an interesting character at all.
Yeah, and so I guess the long story short is protagonists are very important to games, obviously, as you play them. And especially in RPGs that are very story-focused, you really do want your character to feel human, to feel real, and to do that, you give them motivation, conflict, and just give them growth. Give them growth, because as humans, we grow throughout time. I hope that I'm not the same person as I was in high school.
Most of us do.
I really hope so. So, yeah.
Yeah, most of us do grow a lot.
Yeah.
And as you said, like, a good character is really important, especially to an RPG. Then again, you can make an RPG which is extremely story-driven that does not really have a clearly defined character either.
Yeah.
So
and
like, you don't have to have clearly fleshed out characters, but it certainly helps a lot.
It's very helpful, yes. A good example of a character that doesn't really exist in the grand scheme of things is in Pokemon. In Pokemon, that's a great example of a character that just kind of exists. Things kind of happen. It's not a bad game per se, but let's be honest, you remember pretty much most of the side characters besides the main character. In most cases,
of course.
Save. I think a problem with this though I noticed is that a lot of older games have memorable characters probably just because they were the first of their kind. If you know what I mean, like a lot of people remember Red. Red is not that interesting, but a lot of people remember him from Pokemon because he was from the first Pokemon. Same thing with Mario. Mario, especially when he was first released, is not a character. He's not a character at all.
Not really. I mean, at least not the mainline Mario. If you look at like Paper Mario and the Mario RPGs, you actually see a bit more character. Both.
I'm talking about like when gaming first started, or like past Pong ET era, past that area when the revival of gaming is what I would
Mario
say.
Brothers.
Yeah, the revival of gaming. A lot of those characters didn't have personality at all, but it's really interesting that they were so memorable. Because of how unique they were at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then again, you can all, like, cause it does still, even then it kind of depended a little from game thing, because even if there was almost no text or lore or talking, you could still sometimes see a sense of personality just looking at their actions, what they do. Then again, Mario just jumping at some shrooms and eating other shrooms doesn't convey much personality. But if you look at something like Samus, like, you still have some sense of personality,
exactly.
Like, idea of who they are, just based on like the gameplay.
And it's really interesting looking at cross game development. Like, again, as you mentioned, the Mario RPG series, the Paper Mario, that and the Mario and Luigi series, all those have great personalities for both Mario and Luigi that seep through, and this is a good example of that, seep through their actions, not their animations, as opposed to them talking.
Yeah, of course, you see like how the characters look, how they act, and also you kind of see this in like most of the 3D Mario games as well.
Yeah. And
it's kind of just like the 2D platformers one that don't really take the characters at all.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting what Nintendo has done with a lot of their characters by giving them personality. Of course, it hasn't worked out in all cases. Case in point, Metroid Other M. I personally didn't think that game was that awful. The story was miserable. The gameplay was pretty fun, but as the story felt like it didn't feel like Samus's character. But then in the other case, if you like the Mario RPG, that's a good example of how they developed Mario to have a character. Another good example about this is through any of the Toon Link games, like Spirit Tracks, Phantom Hourglass, or Wind Waker. Yeah, those 3 games. Link has so much personality in those games. His action, he's kind of a dope in those games, and it's just very interesting how they portray that through actions without betraying the character that they first created since gaming.
Link still doesn't talk at all, but you can still see his personality looking at his actions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Nintendo's really good at doing that, at showing how they can do it without actions, as opposed to having just dialogue, a wall of dialogue to let you know what's going on. Yeah. So I think that was mostly what we wanted.
I think we've gone through all of it right now.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for listening. Us rambling about how you can make a good character. And hey, if any of you guys are making a game out there, let us know, and maybe you could use some of our advice to make a compelling and interesting character.
Sure.
Yeah. But yes, anyways, any closing thoughts that you would like to leave, Catz?
Not really.
Really,
starting to get kind of tired though.
Yeah, it's pretty late for you. If you guys didn't know, me and Catz are 8 hours apart, so scheduling this thing becomes a bit interesting, to say the least. But anyways, thank you all for listening. My final thoughts, I guess, are enjoy games. Try to enjoy your games. There's a lot you can do with games and characters in general, and maybe next time you play a RPG or any game, Try to take a closer look at the characters, especially with modern 3D games. Take a careful look at the animations. I'm sure the animators will really appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to all of us ramble on. And,
feel free to.
I'm Catz.
I'm Cowbox. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. That'd be awesome. We have both of our information. I'll leave both of our information on the description box below. So, thanks for listening, y'alls. See y'all next time.
Goodbye.